Chapter 14, The Almost Kiss. The morning light in the penthouse didn't feel like a celebration of our victory in the lab. It felt like a spotlight on the mess we were becoming. I stood in the kitchen, dressed in a silk slip dress I'd found in the closet Alexander had stocked for me. It was champagne-colored, nearly the exact shade of my skin in the dim morning glow, and it felt dangerously thin. I was waiting for the kettle to boil, my mind replaying the previous night. Caleb Thorne was back in the shadows, but the mark he'd left on the day was still visible in the way my hands shook when I reached for a mug. I heard the heavy, rhythmic tread of Alexander behind me. He didn't say a word, but the air pressure in the room seemed to rise. I felt the heat of him before I felt his touch. He stepped up behind me, his chest pressing into my back. He was already dressed in his trousers and a white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He reached around me, his large hands resting on the marble counter on either side of my waist, effectively caging me against the cold stone. "You didn't sleep," he murmured into the crook of my neck. His voice was a low rasp, still thick with the residue of the few hours of rest we'd managed. I kept seeing his face, I admitted, closing my eyes. "Caleb." He looked so, confident, like he knew he still had a piece of me. Alexander's grip on the counter tightened until his knuckles turned white. "He has nothing, Maya. I've spent the last 3 hours ensuring that by the time the sun is fully up, his reputation in this city will be as cold as the concrete outside. You don't have to protect me like I'm a child, Alexander." "I'm not protecting a child," he growled, his lips grazing my ear. "I'm protecting my future. There's a difference." I turned around in the small space he'd left me. Our bodies were flush, the thin silk of my slip no barrier against the hard lines of his frame. I looked up at him, seeing the dark circles under his eyes and the raw, unbridled intensity that he only showed me. "Is that what I am?" I whispered. "Your future? Or am I still just the girl in the locked-in claws?" Alexander reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my lower lip. His eyes were focused on my mouth with a hunger that made my knees weak. "The clause is gone, Maya. You saw the paper. You're here because you chose to be, and that makes you the most dangerous thing in my life." He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. The kettle began to whistle, a shrill, piercing sound, but neither of us moved. The world was screaming for our attention, but in this sliver of space, there was only the scent of sandalwood and the frantic beat of 2 hearts. He tilted his head, his lips just a fraction of an inch from mine. I could feel the heat of his breath, the silent plea for a surrender that went beyond the physical. I wanted to close the gap. I wanted to lose myself in him and forget about Caleb, the board, and the dying company. But then his phone on the counter vibrated. The screen lit up with Marcus's name. Alexander didn't look at it. He kept his eyes on mine. "Ignore it," he whispered. "You can't," I said, my voice breaking. "It's Marcus. It's the audit. It's vain." He let out a low, guttural curse and pulled back, the sudden distance feeling like a physical ache. He snatched the phone and answered it, his voice turning into the ice-cold steel of the CEO in a heartbeat. "Talk to me. How much? No, don't wait for the opening. Buy it now. I want the controlling interest by 9:00 a.m. He walked away toward the window, the moment shattered. I stood by the whistling kettle, staring at his back. We were so close to something real, something terrifying, and yet the world always found a way to pull him back to the throne. The almost kiss hung in the air like a ghost, a reminder that in Alexander Blackwood's world, the heart was always a secondary asset to the empire. Alexander POV. I hated the sound of my own voice as I gave the orders to Marcus. Every word about stock options and hostile takeovers felt like a betrayal of the woman standing in my kitchen. I could feel Maya watching me, could feel the disappointment radiating from her like a physical weight. I wanted to throw the phone through the glass window and turn back to her. I wanted to finish what we'd started. But I knew Julian Vane. If I gave him an inch, he would use Caleb Thorne to rip the Horizon project out from under us. I couldn't lose the science, and I damn well couldn't lose Maya. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I told Marcus before hanging up. I turned back to Maya. She was pouring tea now, her movements stiff and mechanical. The champagne silk of her dress shimmered as she moved, a cruel reminder of the night we just shared. "Maya," I said, my voice softer. "It's fine, Alexander. You have a company to run. I have a briefing to prepare." "It's not fine." I walked over to her, but she didn't look up. I reached out and took the mug from her hand, setting it back on the counter. I took her chin in my hand, forcing her to look at me. "The world is going to try to take you from me today. They're going to use the press, they're going to use your past, and they're going to use my own board of directors. They've been trying to do that since the day I got here. But today is different. Today they know I care." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a low, intimate rasp. "I almost kissed you just now, not as a boss, not as a marking of territory, but because I can't imagine breathing without you. And that makes me weak in their eyes." "You're never weak, Alexander." "I am when it comes to you." I kissed her forehead, a lingering, protective touch. "Stay in the penthouse this morning, work from here. I'm going to go down there and finish Vane. Once the dust settles, I'm coming back for you." "I'm not a damsel in distress," she snapped, her fire returning. "I'm the senior advisor. If there's a war at the tower, I should be there." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were tired, and she was wearing a slip that barely covered her. Yet she looked like a warrior. "Fine," I said, a slow smile touching my lips. "But you wear the red suit, the one with the sharp shoulders. If we're going into battle, I want you looking like the queen you are." Maya POV. The red suit felt like a declaration of war. It was a deep, blood-red wool, tailored to within a millimeter of my life. As I stepped out of the private elevator on the 90th floor, the office went silent. Alexander was already at the head of the long conference table in the glass-walled boardroom, surrounded by his legal team. He looked up as I entered, and for a split second, the mask of the CEO flickered. His eyes went dark, his jaw tightening. He didn't say a word. He just nodded toward the empty seat at his right hand. I sat down, feeling the weight of the lawyers' gazes. They knew about the gala. They knew about Caleb. They were waiting for the crack in the foundation. "Let's begin," Alexander said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Marcus, give us the update on Vane Global." "The audit revealed a massive discrepancy in their offshore accounts," Marcus said, his fingers flying across his tablet. "Caleb Thorne was the signatory on a series of transfers that look suspiciously like corporate espionage payments. If we leak this to the SEC, Vane is grounded before lunch." "Don't leak it yet," Alexander said, leaning back. "I want Julian Vane to think he still has a chance. I want him to show up at the 11:00 a.m. meeting thinking he's coming to negotiate a merger. I want to see the look on his face when we hand him the indictment instead." The room was filled with the sound of rapid-fire legal strategy. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. And as I watched Alexander work, I realized why I had fallen for him. It wasn't just the money or the power. It was the way his mind worked. He saw 20 moves ahead while everyone else was still setting up the board. But throughout the meeting, I felt a different kind of pressure. Every time Alexander reached for a file, his hand would brush mine. Every time I spoke, he would lean in, his shoulder touching mine, his scent distracting me from the millions of dollars at stake. The almost kiss from the kitchen was still there, a ghost between us. It was in the way our eyes met across the table, a silent conversation happening beneath the talk of audits and injunctions. I want you. I know, not here. Soon. Around 10:30, the legal team filed out to prepare the documents. The boardroom was suddenly empty, save for the two of us. The glass walls offered a view of the entire city, but the room felt like a pressure cooker. Alexander stood up and walked to the door, locking it with a soft click. "What are you doing?" I asked, my heart beginning to thrum. "Vane will be here in 15 minutes. "Then I have 15 minutes, he said, walking toward me. He didn't stop until he was standing behind my chair. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of my neck. "You were incredible in there, Maya. The way you pointed out the flaw in the encryption transfer. You saved us $5 million in discovery fees alone. I told you I was more than an advisor. You're a revelation." He leaned down, his lips grazing my ear. "And that red suit is going to be the death of me." He turned my chair around so I was facing him. He was standing between my legs, his hands resting on the arms of my chair, pinning me. The light from the windows caught the silver in his eyes, making them look like molten metal. "Alexander, we have a meeting." "I don't care about the meeting. I care about the fact that I haven't kissed you since I gave you your freedom." He reached out, his hand sliding into my hair, tilting my head back. "I want to know if you're still sure." "I've never been more sure," I whispered. He lowered his head, his mouth hovering just a hair's breadth from mine. I could feel the electricity, the sheer, agonizing tension of the almost. I reached up, my hands tangling in his tie, pulling him closer. This was it. No whistling kettle, no ringing phone, just the two of us and the city at our feet. His lips touched mine, a soft, tentative brush, and then the intercom on the table buzzed. "Mr. Blackwood, Julian Vane and Caleb Thorne are in the lobby. They're asking for an early start." Alexander froze. He let out a low growl of pure frustration, his forehead resting against mine. "I am going to fire Marcus," he muttered. "No, you're not," I said, a shaky laugh escaping me. "He's just doing his job. His job is to give me 5 minutes of peace." Alexander pulled back, straightening his tie with a sharp, decisive motion. He looked down at me, his eyes dark with a promise that made my skin hum. "They're here, Maya. The past is in the lobby." "Then let's go show them the future," I said, standing up and smoothing my red blazer. The almost kiss was becoming a habit, a delicious, torturous game of brinkmanship. But as we walked toward the door to face the men who had tried to ruin us, I realized that the tension was our fuel. Every moment we didn't kiss made the moment we would that much more inevitable. Alexander POV. Walking into that lobby with Maya at my side was the most satisfying moment of my career. Julian Vane was standing there, looking smug in a silk suit. Beside him, Caleb Thorne looked like a man who thought he'd already won. When the elevator doors opened and we stepped out, Maya in her blood-red suit, her chin high, her hand resting possessively on my arm, I saw the shift in their expressions. Vane's eyes narrowed. Caleb's jaw dropped. They had expected a broken woman and a distracted CEO. Instead, they were facing a united front. "Julian," I said, my voice like a serrated blade, "I believe you're early." "I thought we could skip the pleasantries and get straight to the merger, Alexander," Vane said, trying to regain his footing. "After all, Caleb here has already mapped out the integration of the Sterling IP into the Vane servers." That's interesting, Maya said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, cold, and utterly confident. Considering I revoked the encryption keys at 2:00 a.m. this morning. Any integration Caleb has mapped out is currently a 404 error. Caleb's face went pale. What, you can't, I know the source code, Maya. You know the 2018 code, Caleb, she said, her eyes flashing with a lethal brilliance. I wrote the 2024 update last night, with Alexander, while you were probably at a bar celebrating a victory you hadn't earned. I felt a surge of pride so strong it was almost dizzying. I stepped up beside her, my presence looming over the two men. And as for the merger, I said, pulling the thick legal folder from under my arm, I think you'll find these documents more relevant. It's an indictment for corporate espionage and a full audit of your offshore accounts. If you don't sign over your controlling interest in the Horizon subcontractors by noon, I'm calling the FBI. Julian Vane looked like he'd been slapped. You can't do this, Blackwood. This is a hostile takeover. No, I said, leaning in until I was inches from his face. This is a cleanup, and you're the trash. I turned to the security detail standing by the doors. Escort Mr. Vane and Mr. Thorne from the building. If they ever set foot on Blackwood property again, have them arrested for trespassing. We watched as they were led away. Caleb Thorne looked back one last time, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and desperation. He looked at Maya, then at me, and he knew it was over. He had been a ghost, and we had just buried him for good. The lobby returned to its usual hum of high-end productivity. I turned to Maya. She was still standing tall, her eyes bright, but I saw the way her shoulders finally dropped. Is it over? She asked. It's over, I said. Vane is crippled. Caleb is finished. And the science is ours. I looked around the lobby. There were a dozen people watching us, assistants, security, visitors. I didn't care. I reached out and took her hand, pulling her back toward the private elevator. Where are we going? She asked. To the penthouse, I said. We have unfinished business. Maya POV. The ride up the elevator was the longest 60 seconds of my life. Alexander was standing against the back wall, his eyes fixed on me. He had taken off his blazer and thrown it on the floor. His shirt was unbuttoned, his pulse visible in the hollow of his throat. The air in the elevator was thick, heavy with the scent of sandalwood and victory. The board is going to be calling, I whispered as the floors ticked past. 70, 80, 90. Let them call. The doors chimed and slid open. He didn't wait for me to step out. He grabbed my hand and pulled me into the foyer, kicking the doors shut behind us. He didn't say a word. He just pinned me against the Vigil of Justice statue, his hands slamming onto the marble on either side of my head. The bronze scales rattled, a soft, metallic sound in the silence of the penthouse. No more meetings, he growled. No more past, no more almosts. He reached out and took my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones with a ferocity that took my breath away. He looked at me as if I were the only thing in the world that mattered, and for the first time I believed it. Maya, he breathed. Alexander. He lowered his head, and this time there was no interruption. The kiss was a collision, a desperate, hungry explosion of everything we'd been holding back since the gala, since the lab, since the very first day in the ballroom. He tasted like power and relief, and I met his tongue with a fire that matched his own. I reached up, my hands tearing at his shirt, wanting to feel the heat of his skin. He groaned into my mouth, a deep, primal sound, and lifted me up. My legs wrapped around his waist, the red wool of my suit rubbing against the fine fabric of his trousers. He carried me toward the bedroom, his mouth never leaving mine. The almost kiss was dead, replaced by a reality that was 1,000 times more intense. In the middle of the day, with the sun shining over the city and the phones ringing downstairs, Alexander Blackwood finally surrendered. And as he laid me down on the bed, my red blazer discarded on the floor, I realized that being locked in wasn't a punishment anymore. It was the only place I ever wanted to be. Alexander POV. The world could burn for all I cared. I looked down at Maya. She was a vision of fire and silk, her hair fanned out against the white pillows, her eyes dark with a desire that mirrored my own. I had spent my life building walls, and she had just walked through them and set the whole place on fire. "I love you." The words were out before I could stop them. I froze, the CEO in me screaming at the vulnerability of the statement. But then I looked at her, and the fear vanished. Maya reached up and cupped my face, her fingers soft against my skin. "I know," she whispered. "I love you too, Alexander." The admission was the final seal. I moved over her, my heart finally finding its rhythm in hers. The silence of the penthouse returned, but this time it wasn't dangerous. It was home. Next chapter, chapter 15, lines are drawn.